Hi, everybody. Welcome to our weekly edition of Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop. I'm Charlie Turner, joined by NASCAR Fantasy Racing Guru and Yahoo Sports expert Dan Beaver. Man, this is a tough day for me. Dan Beaver. Welcome, Dan. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Well,
Apparently a little better than you, I guess. But
you may have to do all the talking today. I'll just get out of the way. That's probably a good strategy most weeks anyway. So this week we go from a road course last week, which was a very exciting race, and kind of turned out the way I think you had it prognosticated pretty well, to one of your favorite tracks, as you've told me many times in the past, Michigan International Speedway and the fast 2 mile oval up in the Irish Hills.
yeah, this is there's something about this 2 mile track. The pavement now, after the repave in 2012, it's starting to get a little bit older, so I think the races keep getting just a little bit better. But the width of those corners, the radius of the corners, it just generally is one of the better tracks for everything. You can pass drivers can pass cars when they get them, catch up to them. It's fast, one of the fastest tracks on the circuit, but not so fast that it's a restrictor plate super speedway, which everybody knows my opinion about those as well, from a fantasy handicapping standpoint at least. This and the 3 mile or 3/4 mile Richmond International Raceway, I think, are two of NASCAR's perfect tracks for things like.
We're hanging up here. Hopefully I get you back. I don't know if I lost you totally or not, but where your screen is frozen, and I'm not hearing anything from you, Dan. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe we need to. There you are. You're back. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably one of those Google, I don't know, bandwidth things. But
So I don't know where I.
now it's doing it again. I think maybe it might not be. It just told me that you just joined the video call, so.
I'm here. If you can
Okay.
hear me, if you can see.
Yeah, I get you now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure where I clicked off, but I was just extolling the virtues of Michigan. In Richmond, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of where it left off. That you talked about Michigan and Richmond being like the perfect ovals. So.
Yeah. So this is also, I think we've got a couple of added storylines this week because we're still still have a chance for NASCAR to fill up their chase grid with winners only. So we got a couple of good opportunities at Michigan. Kyle Larson, I think, has a good chance to win. Casey Kane, Matt Kenseth, even Greg Biffle has an outside chance of winning here. So we've got 3 or 4 drivers who could get their first regular season win here, and that's going to factor into how you handicap the race.
And Marcus Ambrose has also been really fast since this became the fastest track in NASCAR. He hasn't been able to sustain it for the race necessarily, but he's usually been very fast in practice and qualifying. And coming off his big, weekend last weekend at Watkins Glen, maybe a little momentum there.
Yeah, and for the unrestricted intermediate speedways, the bigger ovals, this probably is his best one. He has 3 top 5s in the last 5 races there. All that since the repave. Swept the top 10 in 2012, the year that it was repaved. But I think of this more as a transitional race. I think he'll probably have a little better chance to win next week at Bristol if he gets that balance of aggression just right. But this is important for next week because he needs to sustain his momentum. He needs a top 10. Richard Petty Motorsports, I've got to think, are putting as much effort behind the number 9 as possible. Maybe bad news for Almirola, but I think Ambrose is probably a good dark horse to get a top 10.
Okay, so salary cap game. Where do you start here? I mean, is this a place where you've got obvious guys at the top that you definitely want on your team, almost regardless of money, or are you working? How are you working it this week?
I think you could either start from the top or the middle. I don't think you want to start from the bottom this week. You want to look for good values. A driver like Casey Kane, who has struggled off and on throughout most of the year, is probably going to be a good salary cap uh, value in most games. But he's got a good chance to win, and the same way that Richard Petty Motorsports is going to put most of their effort behind Ambrose, Hendrick Motorsports is going to put a lot of effort behind Casey Kane to get their fourth driver in the chase. Right now, he's just outside that points cutoff that would get those last four drivers into the chase on points. He really needs to win. He can't count on getting high enough in the points to make a difference. And this is one of his best chances to win. He's been really good here in the last couple of years when he hasn't crashed. He's either finished in the top 10 or he's wrecked. Somehow this June he managed to do both. He sustained some crash damage early in the race, and still, if I said win, I meant finish in the top 10. But he still managed to finish in the top 10 even with crash damage. So this and Atlanta are probably his two best opportunities to win, and I think he deserves to be on most salary cap games because of that. You've got some good mid-cap picks. Overall, I think Ambrose would be a good mid-cap pick because he's not going to be as expensive as he was last week at Watkins Glen in games that are doing their redistributions normally or after every week. Clint Boyer enters the week with a 2, 4, 6, 7 race top 10 streak, only one of which has been a top 5 at Michigan. So he's another good mid-cap pick, I think. Then you might jump to the bottom. Think about Trevor Bayne and the Wood Brothers. They're about the only part-time team that's going to be here that's of any note. So they're going to be relatively cheap. Bayne might make your roster for that reason in the salary cap games. And once we get down to the Yahoo portion of this, they're on a whole lot of part-time teams showing up for the rest of the year. We just heard Ryan Blaney announce that he's going to be at Talladega, but Talladega is filled with dark horses already, so that's not going to help out too much. And the salary cap, and that's where I would start probably. Start with the middle, then look at the driver at the bottom, see how much money you have left, and then you're going to think about your marquee drivers. At Michigan, that means Hendrick Motorsports Power this year. So you've got Gordon, Johnson, Earnhardt, none of whom have been perfect over the last 6 or 7 races. They've each had some sort of issues, but they've got so much momentum on their side from what they've done so far this year that I think they're good picks. They're almost no-brainers. Kevin Harvick's finished second in his last 3 Michigan races, so no matter what price tag he comes with, he's going to be a good pick, so long as the team doesn't make another mistake, or if they can overcome the mistake. I think we're looking at him being one of the challengers for the win. So,
yeah, how many race wins has that team cost itself this year? And I can think of at least a couple. The last race here, as a matter of fact, was one of them.
Yeah, and then Johnson taking the victory there, and Kurt Busch has been stout on a number of occasions. It's hard to know exactly with him because once he gets back in traffic, he tends to overreact. It might be the best way to say it, overdrive. So when he tears up, if he tears up a car, it's just as likely because there was some sort of other problem going on than the fact they just steered into the wall.
Any of the 2 Penske drivers, any preference for Keselowski over Logano?
Probably a slight nod to Logano since he's got 3 top 10s, swept the top 10 since joining Penske. And if there's a difference between the June and August race, he was perfect here last year. Won the pole, led the most laps. I think he probably had the most laps in the top 5. Won the race. So he was the class of the field last year. Then the 2 nights in the last 2 June races certainly keeps him up there on the radar screen. So I would say he's another good choice to win, another good option to pick a winning driver. Well,
before we move on to the Yahoo game and your advice there. Any final thoughts on a salary cap type game going to Michigan this week? There looks to be possibly some rain in the forecast for Sunday. I from what I see, I'm no weatherman for sure, but I could see a shortened race there for sure.
Yeah, and Michigan has had some weather issues in the past. I was there a time or two when they barely squeezed the race in and
Me too.
got it shortened. So, but it can't really factor into your handicap. You just don't know when it's going to stop. So you got to go on. You got to pick by the numbers. I've got a greyhound that is stalking me at the moment. If you're wondering why I keep looking a little distracted.
I thought maybe you were typing as we were talking.
No,
Getting a little bit
those are nails on the
Getting a
floor.
little tap dance noise there. That's okay. That's going to add some flavor to the show. We have no problem being photobombed by a greyhound. At least it's a racing dog, fits right in. There you go. Okay, so moving on to the Yahoo Sports game. Before we do that, let's make sure everybody remembers they can read all of Dan's analysis about this weekend's race at, as Dan mentioned earlier today. Why do I draw a blank on RotoWorld? Rotoworld.com, and also, of course, his big Yahoo Fantasy NASCAR article and analysis at YahooSports.com every week. So you should definitely be bookmarking those and reading those as you go. Of course, we want you to watch this every week too, so you can get some kind of last-minute, maybe real-time advice going into the weekend before qualifying and practice starts. So, but now we go to Yahoo Sports. Where do you start? I mean, I assume this is this a track? Let me start. You start with the C drivers. Are we gonna use one of the Kyle Larson, Austin Dillon allocations we have left here, if we have them?
I think you probably are. You do have Trevor Bayne. He could be good for a top 15 finish. He's probably not good for much more than that. And if the player thinks that Kyle Larson and Austin Dillon are going to finish somewhere in the either high single digits or mid to low teens, then starting Bayne is not a bad choice this week. What you want to do is, for that third driver, that next driver other than Larson and Dillon in Group C, is pick the time when they're going to come closest to those drivers and minimize the points loss that you're going to get in those individual races. However, I think Larson's got a good opportunity to finish in the top 5, and if the chips fall the right way, he's got a dark horse chance to win. So this week, I think you probably want to start Kyle Larson. Expect him to get a top 10. Hope he gets a top 5, and if all the cards align, if all the cards fall the right way, he could even get the victory. He's got the Hendrick Motorsports power under the hood. He's been just stout overall, so in general, I think he's a good pick. For that reason, Bayne's attractiveness is a little bit less. This should be one of Kyle Larson's 9 best starts, and if you haven't wasted any allocations on him, that makes him an obvious pick this week. Austin Dillon has swept the top 15 on 2-mile tracks, I believe. So he's another good pick. He's not going to finish that far behind Trevor Bayne, behind Kyle Larson. But the Larson's, if Dillon gives up 3-4 positions to Larson, Bayne gives up 3-4 positions to Dillon, you got a pretty clear pecking order, and then the rest of the decision boils down to salary cap management only. Down in Group C, not salary cap management. Sorry, allocation management.
Yeah. We knew what you meant.
Yeah, and to go back and kind of pay off Dillon, he had a sweep of the top 15 coming into Michigan this year, then finished in the 30s. So, but he was running in the top 15 when he sped on pit road at the end of this June's race, and that's what cost him another top 15 finish there. So you can treat it. He ran well enough to be in the top 15.
All right, so let's move up to the A guys, your A drivers.
The A drivers, I think you can You can think a little bit outside the box this time, this race. Kevin Harvick has all those second place finishes. Casey Kane has the weight of Hendrick Motorsports behind him trying to get the fourth driver in. So those are probably the two drivers that you want to put on your provisional roster before qualification on Friday this week. Dale Earnhardt Jr., though, has had some remarkable wins here, some very emotional wins. He got his first win for Hendrick Motorsports the first year they ran together. He snapped a long winless streak here. This would be another notable win because it would give him the most wins among the drivers this season. No one would be surprised to see him win, but it would solidify his chances to win the championship overall. He's got to be able to win almost on demand. He's got to be able to run well on demand. And that's something that he hasn't done throughout his career and is doing this year. So a victory here, I think, says a lot about how far the driver and team have come. Drivers to avoid, I think both of the Busch brothers would be drivers to avoid in Group A this week. They both are emotional drivers. They both are prone to making mistakes when they lose their composure. So they're two of the drivers that I put down at the bottom of Group A.
Yeah, Kyle's on a bit of a negative momentum roll at the moment too, I think.
Yeah, and last week that may be part of the reason why he lost his composure after the penalty. That should have been his best opportunity to win in quite some time, and to see it all just go away is hard to take. I get that, but it also makes him very difficult to put on a fantasy roster when he does things like he did in the bus stop, running over Martin Truex Jr. and then running into the side of Martin Truex Jr. For not getting out of his way when he ran over him. But
well put, Dan.
But Kyle is the last 6 races pretty much describe Kyle Busch. He's finished second 3 times at Daytona, New Hampshire, and Indy, and then the other 3 have been outside the top 25. And you go a little bit further back, he was 25th at Sonoma and 41st at Michigan. He's up and down, but he's more down than up recently, so he's a good driver to leave on the sidelines.
All right, so that covers us for the A drivers. Now we go to B. I would think B would be the tough place to make your allocations this week.
B's been tough all year, in part because Keselowski and Logano have done so well that you've got to worry about their allocation management, and in part because Roush Fenway Racing's done so poorly that you can't count on them on tracks where you used to be able to count on them. They both, Biffle and Edwards, had horrible Quicken Loan 400 efforts. Edwards was so bad he never cracked the top 15 throughout the entire day. Biffle was a little bit better, but still didn't make much noise. Biffle seems to have a little more momentum on his side now than he had, so I would make Biffle one of my drivers to watch. I'd put him on my provisional roster, but if he doesn't practice well, then you certainly don't want to put him on there. Carl Edwards has top 10 finishes in 75% of his Michigan starts, and pretty much the same record over at Auto Club, the other 2-mile track. But he ran so badly this June that if you put him on your provisional roster, even if he practices decently, you're not sure what you're going to do with him. So, he's there. He probably should be started by the numbers, but it's a risky proposition. Keselowski and Logano. Go ahead.
You mentioned early in the show and repeated it later that we've got Casey Kane with all the Hendrick might behind him this weekend, and Marcus Ambrose, with whatever Penske has, they're going to be pushing everything to get him in a win and getting him into the chase. Greg Biffle's also in that spot, we think, after we talked earlier today. Is it enough to? Does Roush Fenway have enough to, by doing that, to give Biffle a shot here this week?
If he were a Group A driver, I would say he was a driver to avoid. You've got to count on top fives from your Group A drivers. As a Group B driver, I think he's good enough. He's been consistent enough, and Roush Fenway hasn't fallen so far down that it makes him a bad pick in Group B. Biffle has top 15 finishes in his last 4 starts, a 15th at New Hampshire, 13th at Indy, 5th at Pocono, and then last week's 8th at Watkins Glen. Whatever they're doing is enough to get him into the top 10 or in the very low teens. So given that the upside of starting him could be a surprise victory, yeah, Biffle belongs on a player's roster, unless he really struggles in practice. If he struggles in practice, then bench him, start one of your other drivers. Edwards, I just don't know what's going on there. I speculated a time or two that Roush is less interested in Edwards now than he should be or would be if he wasn't trying to get Biffle into the chase, and that's hurting him. But one good thing about Edwards is he's been really good about evaluating his team openly. Partly that's because he's leaving. He doesn't have anything to lose by saying what's really on his mind. And I hope it's a new trend among him, and it'd be nice if it's a trend among drivers. When he says the car is bad, it's bad. And he's not going to say it's good if it's bad. So you can put Edwards on your roster, and if he doesn't speak well of the car in pre-race, then you're not going to start him either. Which then means you're either going to have to start Keselowski or Logano and use up one of those precious allocations on them. Or if you want to look for a driver who's a little bit more of a dark horse, Paul Menard might jump up to the top of the list. He's got 4th place finishes in his last 2 Michigan starts. He's got another 4th 1 or 2 years back. So this is a track where he's been consistent and occasionally strong. He's also got some solid top 15 finishes in there. Richard Childress Racing hasn't been stellar recently, but again, they're in Group B. You can give up a few points in Group B for consistency. So Menard, and then I've got currently Ryan Newman ranked 6th, just behind Carl Edwards. If you're afraid of the Roush Fenway guys and you don't have enough allocations to take the Penske pals, then I think your 2 top picks are Menard and Newman, based on consistency. More top 15 finishes than top 5s and top 10s, but it's nice to know that they're probably not going to finish down in the 20s or 30s.
Good stuff. I particularly liked your comment about Carl Edwards and your observation there that if Carl is one of the I think the most honest drivers out there, and the fact that if he isn't positive about his car after practice, that's a good tip. Leave him off the roster. What else are we looking for in practice? Anything else? I mean, there are going to be a bunch of fast cars. Last time I think we had well over 20 cars that ran over 200 miles an hour at Michigan. You stay away from anybody that can't get there. I would think that'd almost be an obvious.
I think you still want to look at long runs here. And this is a track where it's 2 miles. You don't get as many 10-lap average runs, but listen to the television, the media reporting, and if they say a driver's been good on 5 or 10-lap runs, then I would lean towards them if they've got some fast speed as well. So look for that balance of speed and durability. The practice is important here, but it's kind of like a restrictor plate super speedway. You have to watch it. You can't just look at the numbers and get your and make your decision based on what the raw numbers look like.
All right. Any final thoughts before we go to the second and last trip to Michigan International Speedway in 2014?
Not really. I think the biggest thing to look for here is, are we going to get another unique winner? If we don't get another unique winner, then that's good news for Matt Kenseth, probably. It means that the chase the grid won't get filled by winners only, and he's high enough in the points that he's going to make it. If we don't get another unique winner this week, though, that could make him a little bit more of a risky proposition next week at Bristol. And in fantasy racing, you've always got to be thinking about this race, and kind of like chess, you got to think about the next move as well. So watch Kenseth this week, not only for how he performs at Michigan, but how you think that's going to impact his performance at Bristol in 2 weeks.
Oh, another good tip. And this just seems like such a strange season. We're at Michigan. We're not talking about Matt Kenseth. I'm really not talking about the Roush drivers being a factor much. This is not the old days at MIS for sure.
Yeah, and Kenseth's not out of it. Kyle Busch won at Auto Club. Kenseth had a fourth place finish in that same race. He's got a strong car. And he certainly knows how to get around here with those victories back in his Roush days. So he's another driver that could win this week. It's just not really at the top of my list for a driver who probably will win.
All right. He is, of course, Dan Beaver. You can follow Dan on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Read his analysis at rotoworld.com and yahoosports.com. Of course, catch him here every week on our Dan Beaver's Fantasy Pit Stop, NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop. We'll be back next Thursday about 3 o'clock Eastern Time, and we'll talk about Bristol. That'll be fun. We'll maybe recap this Michigan race a little bit, see what happened here that might affect your choices at Bristol. Dan, thanks again for your time. Stay cool down there in Central Texas. All right, take care.
You got it. All right, bye.